wonderful class.
Hello, thank you so much, Felicia. Hi, everybody. I'm seeing everybody come into the chat, and I love seeing where people are in the world. So hi, I'm in the Twin Cities in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and today I'm going to give you a demonstration of how to make this luscious, I call it dragon petal. That's my name for it. The dragon petal painting with textured thick acrylic. And I'm going to show you all of the supplies that you're going to need and all the techniques. It's a very fun process, and it's great if you're a color lover like me. So first, I want to introduce myself. Hi, I'm Josie. This is I. Hello. If we haven't met, I am a social media fan, so you can find me all over the place as Josie Lewis Art on Instagram and Facebook and Pinterest and YouTube's and the TikTok, all the places. And I use a lot of different art mediums. And what I really am into is color, and I love texture, and I love really pushing mediums to new and interesting methods. I usually work abstractly. Often I'm like relying heavily on the rainbow because I do love the rainbow. And one thing that's happened on social media is that a lot of people have, liked my process. I make these short videos that are like satisfying art videos. And people say, oh, this makes me feel like I could make art. So one of the things that I've been doing over the years now is I'm like, oh, that's so wonderful. I love being inspirational because I do actually think everybody should make art. So I'm so excited to have this opportunity to launch this product launch with Brea, Reese, and Michaels. And not only do we have acrylics, but we also have watercolors. There's a whole line of products that you can check out. But I'm going to jump ahead here a little bit in a moment. So today what we're going to do is I'm going to show you the materials that we're going to be using in a second. And then I am going to give you just a brief color mixing theory basics. If any of you have done some painting and you've ended up making mud, I'm guessing it's happened to a few of us. Give me a yes in the chat if you know what I'm talking about, when you're trying to make a nice clean color and it just comes out looking like something in the garden, like not the color you were looking for. I'm going to talk about a couple of techniques that are going to help you to understand color. You're going to remember them for the rest of your life. I promise it'll be valuable for you. And you're going to be like, oh yes, Josie told me how to fix this. So I'm going to show you how to solve mixing mud. It's a very simple, a simple method. But first I want to get into, I'm going to show you this little video here and narrate it. This is the Dragon Petal and Blooms project kit with thick acrylic. And this is now available at Michael's, and it's got everything you need to make the project that we're going to make today. And it's, outstanding quality. It's super affordable. It's got, it's wonderful to have everything all in one, so you don't have to go around and find all the different things and put it all together. So I'm just going to unpack this kit for you here, and you can see that there's stuff underneath, there's stuff on top. One thing that if you're painting along with me today, it comes with this plastic sheeting that you can put on any surface that you have, because acrylic paint will stain. It will stain your table and it will stain your hands. I probably have paint. Oh yes, I've got paint on my hands for sure. I always do. And it will stain your clothes. So I like to wear an apron just because, I've kind of given up at this point. I'm going to be honest, I just have paint on my clothes. It's just part of my life. But sometimes I do, I'm like, oh, I'm wearing this pristine, black thing, and I put an apron on. It helps a little bit of prevention goes a long way. But the whole point that I want to make here is that acrylic paint is dreadfully staining. It's almost like a plastic when it dries, and it will stain, any article of clothing. It will stay on your hands, and it will stay on any surface it touches. So that's why the plastic is a nice feature of this kit, because you can just put it down to protect your surfaces. So then also in the surface are these wooden panels. I like to work on wooden panels because I like the surface. They're, it's just a little bit firmer. So you may have worked on canvas before, which works for this as well. So if you ended up having trouble finding the panels in the future when you want to make more, the canvas will work as well. But panels are my preference. And then there's also like a project panel that just isn't cradled. As you can see, it's just flat. So to just give you one extra surface to work on. There it is. And then we also have a little technique guide, which is there's a French side and an English side, and it's got lots of helpful tips and tricks that will guide you when you are making your art. And then there's a disposable palette notebook. So what this is just sheets of paper that are almost like wax paper, a little bit more firmer than wax paper. And it's a great way to mix your paint while you're working, and then you can just tear it off and discard it. So I use disposable palettes for almost everything I do, and they're excellent. And by the way, as I'm going here, I will keep one eye on the chat. So if you have any very important questions or unimportant questions, you can ask me anything about this process, please pop them into the chat because I will do my best to answer them. And we'll keep going through this project kit. It's going to come with a couple of palette knives there. You see a round one and a diamond one, and the modeling paste, which is very important for this project, and 6 colors of heavy-bodied acrylic paint. Okay, so now I'm going to go back before we get into making this project. I'm going to go back to my slides. There we go, and give you a little background in color theory. And some of this is going to be very familiar to most of you. I imagine that this is not your first rodeo, and you have made paintings or you've worked with color before. But I'm just going to go over a couple of things here, just to refresh our memory. So of course we start with a color wheel, and there are the primary colors, which are red, blue, and yellow, and those colors you can't mix those with other colors. So I have made very complex paintings with just those 3 colors, like literally a tube of red, a tube of blue, and a tube of yellow. You don't need more than that. I mean, add some white and you're good. But you can also, of course, if you've ever been to an art supply store, you know that there's a lot of different colors available. So the primary colors are like the basics, and then we have the secondary colors, which is the colors in between your primaries. So blue and red, of course, makes purple. Red and yellow, of course, makes orange, etc. And then the tertiaries, and the tertiaries are just that third intermediate. So if you're interested in making a gradient color, which is one of my favorite things, making a very slow and gradual transition between multiple colors, you will rely on the primaries, the secondaries, and the tertiaries. So let me get to my 2 main mixing strategies, and these 2 things are going to help you so much. When I figured this out finally, it was like, oh my gosh, everything makes sense now. So the two mixing strategies that I use is I do something called mixing around the wheel. So we're looking at the wheel, it's kind of like a clock, and if I'm trying to create a saturated and pure color mix, I want to make sure that I am mixing in analogous colors. And analogous colors are just colors that are near each other on the wheel. So you wouldn't want to go, if you're looking at a wheel with 12 different colors on it, you would want to stay in maybe a 5 color range, so you could probably maybe 4 colors where you want to keep that bright, saturated, vibrant color. You want to make sure that you're staying in a close proximity around the wheel, and around the wheel is actually what we're going to do today when I demonstrate the project that we're going to get to in a moment. So if your goal is bright, saturated color, you want to make sure you're staying in a very tight range of the wheel. And it might even help you to have a little color wheel handy. It's especially great if you build your own, because then it just helps you to understand the colors a little bit better. But if you have a color wheel handy, then you'll be like, ooh, I want to mix a real bright yellow. And I don't want it to get too muddy. So then you can kind of decide, which do you want it to trend a little orange, or do you want it to trend a little green? And then you can make that decision by looking at the wheel. Okay, so then the second technique that I use a lot is something that I call mixing across the wheel. And when you are mixing across the wheel, you are mixing complementary colors. So a color that lives on the opposite side of the wheel. Those two colors are now, they kind of like fight with each other a little bit. And they're called complementary colors. And this goes for, right now I'm demonstrating green and red, but you could also look at purple and yellow and blue and orange. And then of course the tertiary colors have complements as well. And those two colors next to each other tend to kind of vibrate. They have a lot of energy when you are putting, if you're making a painting, we're looking at red and green, Christmas is coming up. It's like throw some red and green next to each other, and there's a lot of vibration that happens between those colors. If you mix those colors together, you will end up with a muddier color. And if you want a muddier color, then that's really magical. If you're looking for a vibrant color, however, then you do not want to mix from across the wheel. But if you are, making a painting and you want a nice, dulled out, green, you don't want it to be quite as bright. You want more of a off green or like a gray green, then you can mix a little bit of the complement, which would be red. And you can see this progression happening here in this watercolor painting. Like this is pretty much pure red. This is pretty much pure green. And then this is green with a teeny tiny bit of red added to it. This is red with a teeny tiny bit of green added to it. And then you can see this is about half and half, where it ends up kind of graying it out. You wouldn't call this red or green because it's a perfect mix of the red and the green. And so the reason why this is important is, of course, I like all the colors. I like the vibrant and bright colors, but I also like, every painting can't have all vibrant and bright colors. Sometimes you need to create more neutrals in the painting, and this is the way to do it. And it's also the way to answer the problem that happens sometimes when you are painting and you end up with muddy brown, and you're like, how did this happen? I wanted bright pink and this is not pink. What has occurred? Why is this not bright green? It's actually like a gray. This is not what I wanted. So that what has happened is likely something in your palette got contaminated. So if you're trying to mix up a bright yellow and it starts to look not bright, it's probably because there was a little bit of purple or something else on your palette that got mixed in. So palette discipline is something that you need to think about quite a lot when you are trying to create a bright and vibrant painting. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? How are we doing there in the chat? Everybody having fun so far? All right, let's get into the presentation. Here we go. All right, so for this actual project, I'm using everything that's in the project kit, and I'm adding a couple of things. So first of all, on my board here, you can see I'm using the 5x7 panel, wooden panel. I've got my 6 colors of heavy-bodied acrylic paint that came in the kit. There's the white diamond-shaped palette knife here. There's the disposable palette sheet. There is the paper towels, which is not in the kit, but it is very important. Paper towels, it's just great to have around because inevitably you're going to need them for something. And I think I actually do use the paper towels for a part of this project. So that can be helpful. And then the acrylic modeling paste. which is a really important part of this, and I'm going to explain how it works in just a moment. And then this scuzzy looking cup of water right here is you know, I just use these old plastic containers that I put my paint water in, and it's clear water in there, but there was like paint that was left in the plastic container, so it's not pristine, but I like to reuse things. So Marcy's asking, is there any way we could have a handout of the color wheel you are using? And I believe it is in the I believe it's actually in the booklet that comes with this project. So it's there.
It's in the instruction manual.
It's in the instruction manual. So in the instruction manual, I talk about mixing around the wheel or mixing across the wheel, and I believe that that the image is there. But you know, there's lots of color wheels out there in the world that you could find as well. Okay, so now I'm just going to hit play here, and I'm showing, I guess I already talked about all these things, so I'm just going to speed this up just a little bit. Oh, okay, now I want to show you what we're going to make today. So here we go. This is the dragon petal painting. This is dry. So the modeling paste really holds its shape, and it is very, very satisfying, my friends. It's very, very satisfying. It's quite durable. You can you know, wipe it with a cloth once it's dry. You could dust it with a feather duster. People always ask me, how do you clean it? And I'm like, I don't know. I guess I've never dusted my paintings, but you could certainly do it. So another project that you can do with the instructions and the supplies in the kit are these, I call them blooms because they look kind of like flowers. And the color opportunities here are, you know, without end. You can do any series of colors with these different projects. As you can see, I'm showing you a few of the blooms that are really fun to make. We're not making a bloom today, but we do have a video demonstrating the bloom creation as well. So today we're going to make the classic diagonal dragon petal. And then something else that I do, I've been getting into making landscapes. So you know, a lot of what I do is abstract, but lately I'm really interested in like sunsets or sunrises. So this is an example of different ways of different variations that you could do with this technique, which I think is really fun. Okay, so now we're going back to, this is what we're going to make today. I think I did a different color order. I actually made this project this morning, so this is very fresh, and I just filmed it because it's easier for me to try to narrate while I'm staring at the screen rather than trying to make art and narrate at the same time. So here we go. Now to get started, you need to have the palette sheet and your 5x7 panel. And I'm putting the modeling paste right there in the sort of the top center of the palette sheet with my white trowel, and a decent amount, you know, kind of like fist size or palm size, like a decent amount of that modeling paste. And this part is really important. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to demonstrate how to get that petal form. And so it can be a little bit tricky. So there's a couple things I want to point out here. My focusing isn't the most awesome here, but there's a couple things I want to point out. So I'm right-handed, and so what you want to do is to have your palette on your right side or your dominant side. If you're left-handed, it would be the opposite side. So you have your palette on the side that you kind of like you'd be dragging the modeling paste towards you in a diagonal way. So you're kind of like, I'm, you know, showing you with my right hand, you're like kind of pulling it towards your midsection. So you're doing this diagonal motion, and you want to have, I like to call it like a runway. So you want to have like quite a bit of runway. So your modeling paste is going to be at the top of your palette sheet, and then you're going to be pulling it down. So now I'll hit play again here. We can keep watching it. So you can see that I'm pulling it down. There we go, pulling it down. And it kind of creates what I call like a bead on the back side of the palette knife. And I like to have a nice clean area to start from. As you can see, I'm kind of like getting lots of different swipes. And now I'm doing a sample. And to a question in the comments, she's asking, or they're asking if we can watch it later. And yes, it'll be up on YouTube, I guess on Monday on the Michaels channel. So it absolutely will be available. So you can see here that I am carefully just experimenting with depositing that bead, creating a bead, and then depositing it in a little area there. And I would highly advise, if you try this, when you try this project, because I know you're going to want to, I would highly advise doing doing the exercise of figuring out. It can be a little tricky to get that motion correct. Kathy's asking if drywall compound will work, and sadly it does crack. Has been my experience when I've experimented with different things. So I don't think it's the best route, but it does have kind of the same consistency. You'd think it would work, but it doesn't. It isn't stable. Okay, so now you can see that I am just kind of like creating that great runway so that I have a nice cleared area to work from. And now one of the things that I'm going to, that's really kind of cool about this particular modeling paste, there's a lot of mediums and pastes on the market. This modeling paste, it can act like white paint. So some of the gels are transparent. This modeling paste is opaque and it is white. And you can actually use this modeling paste without any color at all, but you don't have to add much color. It will darken slightly when it dries, but it's a very subtle shift in color. And so a lot of these projects turn out to be a little bit on the pastel side because the modeling paste, like I said, is white, but they will darken. So I want to go back here just a little bit and show you just how small the quantity of paint is that I'm using. So I squeezed out like the teeny tiniest little pea-sized bit of purple paint. I'm starting with purple on this for this project, and mixing it in. Of course, you can always add more. So I always like to start a little bit more conservatively when I'm mixing colors to try to get the tone that I'm looking for. And then you can always add more. It's easier to add more color than it is to add more modeling paste, because if you have to add more modeling paste, then you end up maybe getting more paint than you want, more paint in that color than you want. Okay, so now I am going to create my bead with this lilac paint. And you can see I'm using that, cross body motion. And I'm taking a break for some reason. I'm probably going to get some coffee. I don't know what's happening. Maybe I'm petting my cat. I put my palette knife down and I'm walking away. I'm back. Okay, I'm back. As a side note, since I did have that momentary lapse where I left the palette for a moment, is that once you get going with this, it does dry relatively quickly. So there's a working time with both acrylic paint and the modeling paste. So if you take a phone call for 20 minutes and you come back, you will have problems because the paint will have already started to dry. So once you get going here, you need to keep going. Now, if you have a lot of paint on your palette and you need to go somewhere, or you need to take a break, you can put a piece of cellophane over the top of that, and that will preserve it for a little while, not too long. I also know of some artists that will put their palette in the freezer, which apparently works beautifully. I've never tried it because I don't have space in my freezer for paint, but I guess if you freeze it, I live in Minnesota, so half of the year it's cold enough that I could just put it outside, I suppose. Haven't experimented with that, but that is one way to preserve it. But like I said, once it's out of the tube, you have a very limited amount of time and you got to keep working or it'll dry up on you. And the modeling paste dries rather quickly. The modeling paste, I think, dries faster than the paint. In fact, it starts to get it can get kind of crumbly and crusty pretty quick. So you need to keep moving and start, with smaller amounts. There was a question back there about starting small, and it's like, yeah, start with small amounts of modeling paste and smaller amounts of paint, and then you can always add a little bit more and a little bit more. Okay, so now I'm going to create my first petal. So you see the bloom, or you see the bead on the back of that knife. I'm starting from the lower corner back of the knife and smushing it down carefully. The paint does shrink a little bit, so I like to squish it way off the side of the panel. So it's like there's a little bit of an overlap there, and you can see that I'm just kind of smushing it down. It's a wrist motion that you'll have to practice. And by the by, I have done this style of art for a long time, and I've done many workshops. And I have found that everybody does it different, which is beautiful. I love that. I love that about how this, like you think, oh, okay, that this petal motion that Josie does, that looks pretty easy. I can duplicate that. And it turns out that a petal is as unique as a signature, so you could make a painting that is very similar to this, but the way you're painting, the way your petals will come out will be different. And I think that that's really fun. You're going to have a unique mark and a unique expression while you do this. So, okay, so now the next thing I'm doing here is my palette was kind of sliding around a little bit here. So I just put some tape just to hold it down, because if your palette's wiggling around too much, it can be kind of annoying. So I decided to just tape it down a little bit. So now another color technique that I'm doing here is called, I call it the mother method. And so as you could see, there is a whole lot of purple paint that was still left on the palette, and I wanted to create a gradient. I'm creating a gradient here. And so I wanted to take some of that purple paint and then mix just a little bit of fuchsia or red into that purple paint. So it is a slight color transition. It's not a huge jump. And so then using the mother method works because I'm using some of that purple paint that was already there, and then I add a little bit of that fuchsia. Like I said, I'm working around the wheel. So I'm going from purple to fuchsia, and I'm creating, I guess, a tertiary here. And now I'm going to amp up the pink just a little bit more. And you can see when I am making those color shifts, I'm just like tapping the back of that palette knife in the color, and it's just like the teeny tiniest little bit. And one thing that's very important to note here as I'm painting is that the paint quality is very good, which means it is incredibly staining. So in paint language, a staining paint means there's a lot of pigment in it. And every single paint carries a different pigment load. And so you'll find that, that purple and that crimson has a very high pigment load. Yellow tends to have a lower pigment load, just kind of across the board. So when we get to yellow, there's like some different techniques that we need to use, because usually you need less red, less blue, less purple, and more yellow, just because of the way yellow functions as a paint color. And then also, though, we were talking about, there's the primary colors, and then when you mix blue and red, you get purple. But it's never as simple as, oh, yeah, it's just half and half. It's 1 part red, 1 part blue, and you'll have a perfect purple. It never happens that way. It's never that simple. And usually the ratios are very dependent on the color that you're using, the type of paint. There's a lot of variables. But normally, especially when it comes to purple, you're going to need far more red. And so it's usually 3 parts red and 1 part blue will create a nice lilac purple, which we didn't really, I started off, we didn't have to mix purple in this project because we had the purple that just came straight out of the tube. But it's really never a fair ratio, it's usually like much more of one color and much less of another color. And that's really going to become clear when we get to the yellow range, because yellow is, like I said, it doesn't have the same staining capabilities as the other colors. And so that is a,
Josie?
yes.
Kelly is asking a question about petal placements.
Ah, yes. Okay, so I am overlapping the petals, and there's a lot of different ways to do it, and I'm just doing like kind of a arc, a half circle, and I push the petals pretty far up, like I'm overlapping quite a bit. And like I said, it will shrink just a tiny bit. So I like make sure that there is, that they're very close. They're very, tightly compressed and compacted there. But as far as the, there's different patterns that you can make. You can do like just straight lines straight across. You can do more of an arc. You can do, so many different things. There's so many different ways that you can apply the petals that it's a pretty there's a lot of variables that can help in this whole process. Oh my goodness. Okay, I put some red in there, and so then now we have quite a bright pinky corally red. And at this point now, if you are making a painting like this and you have a little bit of that purple left on the palette, it starts to get to where that strong purple, that you can see that little pile of purple that's sitting there, if you happened to bump it with your palette knife, that would create a very strong contamination, and you would end up not having that nice corally pinky red that I was going for. You'd end up with something a little more dull. And if you're going for a duller color, then that's great. If you're doing it on purpose, then that's what you want to do. But in this situation now, my palette is now starting to get a little bit congested. And in a moment here, I'm going to show you how I manage that, because if I started to get some of that purple in this mix, purple is dangerously close to a complementary color to orange, and it would dull it out. It would neutral it out, and you wouldn't have a nice, bright pinky, orangey, pastel-y color. You'd end up with something more, it would be some variation of tan was what would happen. It would get more and more grayed out. So you need to use a lot of palette discipline as you are putting the colors down. And I'm going to show you in a moment here, especially when we get into the yellow range, and I want to keep my yellow really crisp and bright. That's when I get very, very careful about my palette discipline, because yellow, like I said, it just like, it takes the teeny tiniest little bit of contamination from a blue or a red to totally change the color completely. So there we go. The yellow is going down. And feel free, of course, to pipe in with any kind of questions you have as I'm going. Sometimes it has happened that I'll be working on a painting like this, and I will smudge it with my finger. Oh no. Or the cat jumps up on my table. That has happened to me more than once. And maybe, her whiskers go in the wet paint or something like that. And it's possible that you can create, you can, if it's around the outside edge, like for instance, if I put my knuckle in this part of the paint right here, I could scrape it off and start again. Okay, but I do want to make a note of what I'm doing here. So I'm finishing up this yellow, and now I'm scraping all that paint all that purple paint, all that red paint, everything. I'm getting rid of that because I'm now transitioning into the exact other half of the wheel. And I want to make sure that the colors are crisp and bright and vibrant. And so what I did is I just took all that wet paint that was on the canvas and I scraped it off. And then now that the paint that's left there will dry quite quickly and it won't contaminate my palette. But I really want to make sure that I'm removing all those old colors so that the next round of colors can be bright and crisp and vibrant. So I'm kind of, starting over. If you were in a position where your palette had a lot of different colors, then you could just start a new sheet. You could sometimes the palette sheets just get kind of nuts, and I would suggest in that case just to throw that sheet away and start fresh altogether. There's a question about the edges being raised and it being a problem in framing. So there's two ways to handle that. Way number one would be to use a shadow box frame, which I prefer, I think, for this style. So a shadow box frame just has like a little gap between, the outside edge of your canvas or your platform, and then there's a little tiny gap, and then the frame sits just next to it. And I think that looks really nice with this style. So I like that a lot. Another thing you can do is while it's still wet and you finish it, you can drag your palette knife along that outside edge and clean it up, So if you don't like the look of the petals kind of dragging over the side, I happen to like that. I like it when you can see that the paint is really dimensional and it's pushing off the side of the palette. I think that looks kind of cool. But if you don't like that, you want it to be a little cleaner, you can just basically cut it when the paint is still wet. You can just cut it off with a knife. You could also potentially cut it off with like a X-Acto knife if there's like little bits and pieces once it's dry and you want to clean it up and frame it more conventionally. That's a possibility as well. Hopefully that answers the question. Okay, so now I did pure yellow. I cleaned up the palette before I got going with the yellow. You will notice you'll have to use more yellow. And now, do you see that teeny tiny bit? That it was less than a pea. That was more like a grain of rice, a quinoa, a grain of quinoa. I don't know. I haven't had quinoa for a while, but I feel like it's a very small little seed-like thing. And that green color is so powerful. It's so staining that you can see it has like given me this acid green with just that teeny tiniest little bit. So, to get that green, acid green color, it's basically like 10 parts yellow to 1 part green or blue to keep it not completely greened out, or full teal. So that is something that, word to the wise, you need way more yellow and just the teeniest, tiniest bit of that phthalo blue or that phthalo green blue color that I'm using there. This is one of my favorite colors. I definitely enjoy teal. I don't know, like a whipped teal color is one of my faves. Like I just love it. Like these different shades of like a greenish bluish teal. It's my fave. It's my flavor. So as you can see, I'm just kind of going in a little bit of a stripe, going around, overlapping a little bit. And in answer to the earlier question that somebody had, there's really, there's no rules here. I mean, I've seen people do this so many different fun and interesting ways. And I myself have done this in many, many different ways that are really fun to experiment with. And so the textured paint there's a lot of different things you can do. One thing that I would say is if you're working, you always have to give yourself room to like let your knife move. So if you kind of like create a circle or something, and then there's like not much room to put the paint petal in there, it can be a little awkward and it could be kind of tricky. So as you can see, I'm working I work usually I work from the lower left corner to the top right. So I'm working in a diagonal upwards, depending on what I'm doing. And sometimes, of course, you can always rotate the canvas if you want to, attack it from different angles. That works as well. And now I'm trying to get some of that more blue color in there. You know how I love the teal, but wanting to make sure I'm finishing it off, getting the whole spectrum. Now you wouldn't have to, you could decide to do this monochrome. I've certainly done that. You could do it with just 2 colors. There's so many different color variations that are really, really fun with a project like this. I happen to love the rainbow, so I like to get the whole rainbow in there. And so you kind of have to make adjustments, even though I've made this project countless times, hundreds probably of times in different color arrangements. I always end up having to make adjustments as I'm going, because I don't necessarily like plan out exactly where everything's going to go. And sometimes it ends up being like a little bit more pink or a little bit more yellow or a little bit more just in quantity there, there's more teal or more one color. So then I try to distribute it fairly evenly. And it just takes, like I said, a little bit of adjustment as you're going. And so you can also see that I'm always adding more of the modeling paste. So, it's like there's a little bit extra there all the time. It's probably better to go, a little bit more conservatively, and you can always add more. And then of course you're not wasting the product, so you can continue to use it. And sometimes I do, like if I have a bunch of modeling paste that I didn't use, I'll put it back in the container, or I'll put it in a little Tupperware. That will work sometimes too. Sometimes when I'm making a lot of work, I will pre-mix the colors in Tupperware, and then that way it's like I'm not mixing it as I'm going, I'm mixing it ahead of time, and then I can just produce a lot more, because I do sell these. So I'll make a whole lot of them and then sell them at the holidays, or I'll have shop updates or things like that.
Josie, we do have a couple
Yeah.
questions.
Oh, good.
Jewel is wondering if you've ever done all the petals in one color and then dry brushed or airbrushed color on top.
Yes, I've done both of those things. Yeah. I've done both of those things. In fact, the piece it's a ways away over my shoulder there, but that one is dry brushed on top. And I don't love that technique as much. But I think there's some potential there. I made a painting and then I decided I didn't like the color arrangement that I had, but I tend to like the freshness of the color just as it is on the palette. And so I don't know that you can do it. You can absolutely do it. And sometimes I'll decide that like just one little section isn't quite right. So I'll go in with pure acrylic and not with a medium. The medium changes the consistency of it a little bit. And so then if I want to just change the color, I'll just use heavy bodied acrylic straight out of the tube with a brush. And then I have in fact done airbrushing too, and that creates a really interesting effect. I'm not an airbrushing expert. I know there's people in this world that are like extraordinarily good with the airbrushing, and I would love to see an effect of that, because that would be really fun. So there it is. There's our juicy rainbow painting, and I hope you guys make one of these because they're really fun. And just a note here, we have a little bit of time for me to answer some questions, and I have a couple of notes. Melody asks a very good question that everybody asks, which is how long do these take to dry? The modeling paste dries a little faster than a lot of gel mediums. It takes about, I think it takes 2 days maybe. So what'll happen is that like a skin will form over the top of it, and then it'll still be kind of spongy inside. And then eventually it gets, I wouldn't call it rock hard. It's kind of like a plastic. So it has a little bit of, even when it's very, very dry, it has a little bit of give to it. But it takes, I wouldn't ship it if I was going to sell a piece. I wouldn't ship it for probably 3 days just to make sure it was really exceptionally hard and dry. But once it is finished, Nell is asking, do I need to varnish and seal? No, you do not. They're very, very durable. Like I said, you can wipe them down with a wet cloth. You can drive your car over them pretty much. Like they're very, very, very durable. You can, if you don't like the surface, so like the modeling paste in the Josie Lewis kit has like a satiny finish, so it's kind of on the matte side. It's not super glossy, and so it really depends on your preference, because some people like a really glossy finish. So sometimes when I don't like the finish of something that came out, I will use Mod Podge or something and just brush it on. It's not my favorite to do that, because you can see the brush strokes when you do that, but sometimes just for whatever reason I'll do that. And so this particular modeling paste has a satin finish when it's dry, and it will in fact be a little bit it's matte, and it will darken a little. I think I mentioned that the colors are fairly stable, but they will darken a little bit. Okay, I see a question here about, when you do a bloom, do you start at the edges? I always start in the outside edges. And in fact, if you buy this, or you can just search my YouTube, I think it's also on the Brea Reese website, I have a tutorial of both this project and also the bloom project. So you can watch me do this one again, or you can see how I do the bloom, which is, the circular going inside, going outside in. So that's how I do that. And let's see.
We had one more question.
Yes.
To know, how do you know how much paste to use for certain dimension?
So like the scale of the canvas, is that kind of the question there?
Kalyani, I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly, but if you want to jump in, we can clarify.
Yes. Okay. Well, I can take a crack at that one. So I have found that this the kit as it comes has enough modeling paste for one of these, for one of the this style, which is like the gradient like this, and then also you can do one of the 8x8, the 8 inches by 8 inches bloom, and I think there's a little extra in that particular jar for this particular kit, and I if I'm not using my particular kit, then I sometimes will buy modeling paste by the gallon, and I just use a lot of it. So it is the main part of this process, but it's more economical than high quality paint, and it dries a little bit differently. A lot of different, if you're using just acrylic paint without the modeling paste, you'll find that they'll flatten out, they'll kind of soften, they won't hold their tone, they won't hold their dimension. So you really do need a modeling paste to do a project like this, and for it to be stable. And you'll use far more modeling paste than any kind of paint. So the paint will last a real long time, and the modeling paste you'll use a decent amount of materials. Let's see, is there another? Miriam says, can you use any acrylic paint? Yes, pretty much yes, although I prefer a heavy bodied acrylic paint. Sometimes I've used like a liquid acrylic, or I'll have like a more soupier version around, like a pourable acrylic or something. And the trouble with a more liquid acrylic is that it will start to degrade the integrity of the modeling paste structure, and so it will kind of soften up, and you might lose your peaks, so you really do want to make sure that you're not mixing it up. You wouldn't want to mix water or anything like that into the modeling paste. You want to keep it as stiff and as heavy bodied as possible so that it holds those forms. And there's a question about the Vivid Vibes tube and bag kit. Yes, it is. I think I saw the Brea Reese website link there. There are a couple of videos there about how to use the frosting technique. I'm not sure if I have an image of that for you here, but you can use like frosting bags and then put this medium mixed with color into the frosting bags and then create some really cool shapes that way. And there's a full tutorial on that for sure. So you can definitely find that. Okay, my friends, any other last minute questions here? Next week, I'll be coming back with Michael's live to do a process on watercolor, because part of this product launch that we have right now at Michael's has both the acrylic, a whole line of acrylic products that you can use for the thick, heavy-bodied acrylic, and then also you can learn to do some watercolors with me. So that will be fun. I see a question from Kathy. Can you use baby powder if the paste is too thin? I've never used baby powder. I would fear that that would crack. I have, however, used marble dust, and marble dust is what I understand is actually a component of many modeling paste. I don't know if it's the component in my modeling paste. I should probably get the ingredient list of what they put in that. But if you really want to stiffen it up, you can add marble dust. However, marble dust, if you add too much, you can run into some cracking issues down the line. So I tend to not mix too much stuff into the modeling paste. Like there's a lot of modeling paste out there in the market. I've tried a lot of them, and I want two things out of my modeling paste. I want it to hold its texture, which this particular, the Josie Lewis brand of modeling paste does in fact hold this texture very good. And I also don't want it to crack. And I have been working with the Josie brand for, now I've been, working with it for 6 months or something, and I've never seen it crack. So I've been very pleased with this modeling paste because it has to have enough structural integrity to hold the texture, but then it also has to have enough flexibility that it won't crack when it dries. And this modeling paste is fabulous for that. So I do hope to see you all next week. It looks like Tuesday, October 10th. I'll be back. We'll be talking watercolor, another one of my favorite mediums. And I hope you do go ahead and pick up some supplies at Michael's and make some cool art. I'd love to see it. So tag me on Instagram or wherever you post when you're done making the art. And I'll pass it over to you, Felicia.
You have done an awesome job. Again, like she said, we would love to see you in her next class. Again, that's the watercolor pattern play at Josie Lewis Art at the same time on next Tuesday. So I hope you all have a wonderful weekend and see you soon.
Bye, everybody.